The first rays of the Egyptian sun crept over the eastern horizon, spilling golden light across the slow-moving waters of the Nile. In the village of Purbastet, nestled between the fields and the riverbanks, the world stirred to life, as it had for thousands of years. The farmer, Hotep, son of the soil. Hotep rose before dawn, roused by the distant croaking of frogs and the hum of insects. His home, a simple mud-brick dwelling, was still cool from the night. He broke his fast with a bit of coarse bread and onions, then joined his sons, heading barefoot into the fields. It was the season of parade, the time of emergence, when the Nile's floodwaters had receded and the black earth was ready for planting. With his wooden plow and a pair of oxen, Hotep turned the rich silt. Nearby, others sowed barley and emmer wheat by hand, trusting in the gods for a bountiful harvest. By midday, sweat soaked their linen kilts. They paused only briefly for water and figs, working until the sun began to dip. Farming was not just survival, it was sacred. The god Osiris, lord of the underworld, was believed to dwell in the fertile soil. The noblewoman, Lady Tia, daughter of prestige. In her spacious villa surrounded by palm trees, Lady Tia began her day with scented oils and servants brushing her hair into elaborate braids. Her linen gown was fine and white, her jewelry glittered with gold and lapis lazuli. Tia oversaw the household, managing the servants, preparing offerings for the household shrine, and dictating letters. As the wife of a scribe, she held status and influence. She spent hours weaving baskets, supervising her children's education, and reciting prayers to Isis and Hathor. In the afternoon, she visited the temple to leave offerings, a gesture of piety and status, before returning home to prepare for an evening feast. There would be honeyed cakes, music played on lyres, and perhaps a dancer performing under torchlight. The scribe, Mena, keeper of words. Mena, a scribe in service to the temple, began his morning with ink and papyrus. In a shaded alcove within the temple compound, he copied records, drafted legal documents, and maintained the temple's vast archive of religious texts. He could read and write hieroglyphs, hieratic, and even the cursive demotic script. His skills set him above most. Literacy was rare, and scribes were valued by priests, nobles, and even the pharaoh's officials. By midday, Mena had documented the temple's grain offerings, sent messages to a neighboring town, and recorded a land dispute between two farmers. His work was meticulous. One mistake in a sacred text could offend the gods. The priestess, Nefret, voice of the goddess. Within the towering halls of the temple of Badat, Nefret performed sacred duties. She bathed in lotus-scented water, wore spotless robes, and burned incense before the statue of the goddess. Her voice echoed as she chanted prayers that had been sung for centuries. Nefret was one of the few women allowed within the sacred inner sanctum. She guided worshippers, interpreted omens, and led ceremonies that aligned with the lunar calendar. Her role was vital. In her chants, the gods heard the voices of the people. The builder, Kai, worker of stone. At the edge of the desert, near a rising tomb, Kai and hundreds of other workers hauled limestone blocks under the blazing sun. Their camp was well-fed, with beer, bread, and meat provided regularly. They were not slaves, they were state workers, respected for their part in building monuments for eternity. Kai spent the day chiseling stone, moving it with wooden sleds, and singing rhythmic songs to ease the labor. His sweat fell on the bones of pyramids. When night came, he slept under the stars, proud to serve the divine pharaoh. The child, Bebi, dreamer of papyrus tales. Bebi darted barefoot along the edge of the Nile, his hair in a sidelock, a mark of youth. He chased ibis birds, fished with a reed net, and wrestled in the dust with his brothers. At home, he helped his mother grind grain and shape dough for bread. By moonlight, his grandmother told stories of gods who sailed the sky in golden boats, of Anubis who weighed the heart, and of Ra who battled darkness every night. Bebi dreamed of becoming a warrior, or perhaps a priest or a scribe. In Egypt, every life had a role, and every role a place in the gods' design. As the stars blanketed the desert and cool winds blew from the west, the village of Probastet settled into sleep. Candles flickered. Prayers were whispered. The Nile flowed on. And tomorrow, as always, the people of Egypt would rise with the sun. Part 2. The River's Rhythm. The morning mist drifted gently over the Nile as another day awakened in Probastet. The river, lifeblood of all, carried with it the scent of wet reeds, lotus blossoms, and 1,000 whispered prayers. From fishermen casting their nets to priests chanting invocations, Egypt stirred once more beneath the watchful gaze of the gods. The fisherman, Khemu, brother of the river. Khemu rose before the horizon flushed pink. His canoe, made of papyrus, was moored in the reeds. He moved with practiced grace, sliding silently into the water. His net, handmade from flax fibers, trailed behind him like a spider's web floating on the tide. The Nile was generous, but only to those who knew her moods. Khemu scanned the water for silver flashes, tilapia, perch, and catfish. He offered a quick prayer to Sobuk, the crocodile god, protector and terror of the waters. As he pulled in the net, it writhed with the morning's catch. He smiled, imagining the look on his daughter's face when he brought home her favorite, grilled fish wrapped in lotus leaves. He paddled back as the sun climbed higher, content, sunburned, and thankful. The apprentice scribe, Passer, the ink-stained boy. Inside the temple archives, Passer sat cross-legged on a mat of woven reeds, hunched over a practice tablet. He was 12 years old, his head shaved except for one braided lock. His fingers were smudged with black and red ink. "Do it again," barked his master, pointing to a crooked line of hieroglyphs. "The word for truth must not lean like a drunk ox." Passer sighed but obeyed. He dipped the reed brush into soot-based ink and rewrote the sacred word Ma'at, truth, balance, cosmic order. To write was to summon power. Each symbol was alive. During the midday rest, he crept outside and watched the pigeons flutter on the roof tiles. One day, he told himself, he would write scrolls for the pharaoh. One day, his name would be remembered. The tomb artisan, Rhea, carver of eternity. In the cool shadows of a limestone cliff near Thebes, Rhea knelt before the wall of a noble's tomb. His chisel tapped in a patient rhythm, revealing a procession of painted figures, servants offering wine, cattle, incense, and bread to their master in the afterlife. Rhea was a master artisan, part of the elite group that lived in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina. Their hands built the resting places of the divine. They carved spells from the Book of the Dead, ensuring the soul's safe journey beyond the western horizon. His youngest daughter had just been born, and so today, as he painted an image of the goddess nut arching across the ceiling, he whispered her name to the stars. He believed the tombs were not only for the dead, they were love letters to eternity. The soldier, Hormheb, defender of Kemet. Far from the village, on Egypt's eastern border near the desert dunes, Hormheb stood with shield and spear in hand. The day was hot, the wind dry and sharp as a blade. His post was one of vigilance, for raids from desert tribes were not uncommon. He trained with discipline mock battles, archery drills, chariot riding. His officers spoke of glory, of protecting the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, in the name of the pharaoh, the living god. At night, he stared into the fire and whispered to the stars above, to Horus and Sekhmet, asking for strength. He missed his wife, his son, the smell of bread baking at home. But his place was here, guarding the sacred land. The priest, Imhotep, reader of stars. In the great temple of Ptah, Imhotep, an elderly priest with a silver beard, traced his fingers over ancient scrolls beneath flickering oil lamps. He was an astronomer priest, a watcher of the sky, tasked with reading omens and marking the calendars. Tonight, a rare event was predicted, a lunar eclipse. The moon would darken, swallowed by the shadow of Set. Imhotep prepared the rituals to protect the land, for signs in the sky were not taken lightly. He climbed the temple tower at dusk. There, Beneath the glowing constellations and the fading calls of birds, he murmured to the gods. "We are but dust," he said softly. "Yet in dust, your will is written." As the day ends, the Nile glowed like molten gold as the sun dipped behind the palm trees. Smoke from cook fires curled upward. Families gathered on rooftops. Children laughed, and old women told tales of Anubis and the weighing of the heart. In Probastet, as stars shimmered above and crocodiles slipped silently beneath the reeds, Egypt slept once more, wrapped in linen dreams and the eternal hum of river life. Part 3. Under the gaze of the gods. The sun rose over Egypt like a blazing eye, watching from the throne of Ra himself. In the village of Probastet and beyond, life resumed beneath its sacred warmth. But not all days began with peace. Some began with pain, others with prayer, and some with purpose so heavy it bent the very backs of men. The slave, Bakari, born of chains. Bakari did not rise with the sun. He was already awake. Sleep was short, hunger longer. The overseer's lash had found his back yesterday, and his muscles ached as if pulled from his bones. He worked not in the fields or village, but in the blazing heart of a copper mine deep in the Sinai. He was not Egyptian. His skin was darker, his tongue once different, until it was broken by years of commands and curses. Captured in a border raid, he was sold to a noble family and assigned to the mines. There was no shade here, only heat, rock, and the scream of metal on stone. Bakari and dozens like him struck the walls with bronze picks, hauling baskets of ore on their shoulders. The gods, he was told, saw all. But he wondered if they saw him. And yet he lived. And that was its own kind of rebellion. At night, beneath a sky that shimmered with stars, he whispered old songs from his homeland, carved his mother's name into stone with a sharpened flake, and stared toward the west, where the dead were said to walk free. The midwife, Merit, mother of birth and death. Back in Probastet, in a house where sweet incense fought the smell of blood and clay, a woman screamed into the straw-covered floor. Merit, the midwife, knelt beside her, hands steady as stone. "Breathe," she whispered, "breathe with Hathor's grace." She had done this 100 times. She knew the signs, the tension in the belly, the sweat on the brow, the way the child turned. She had saved babies, lost others. She had watched life come, and watched it go before it ever drew breath. Today the gods were kind. A girl was born, slick and crying, full of fierce noise. Merit held her to the mother's chest, cut the cord with a sharpened flint, and offered a prayer of thanks. The father wept, the grandmother danced. The neighbors sang praises to Taret, the goddess of childbirth. Merit cleaned her hands, tied her shawl, and walked home alone. Hers was a lonely calling, but a holy one. Without her, nothing continued. The royal attendant, Jeddu, shadow of the throne. In the city of Memphis, capital of the two lands, the palace gleamed with whitewashed walls and banners of crimson and gold. There, Jeddu moved in silence, robes flowing, steps precise. He was an attendant of the palace, a whisperer, a servant, a pair of eyes behind the throne. He fetched scrolls for the vizier, poured scented water for the royal wife, and ensured that no word, no visitor, no breeze reached the pharaoh's chamber without approval. Jeddu saw what others didn't. The pharaoh's illness, the priest's ambitions, the concubine's secret letters. He kept his mouth sealed as tightly as the tombs beneath the desert, for his life depended on silence. At night, in his private quarters, he stared into a polished bronze mirror, wondering who he truly was. A servant? A spy? Or a thread in the great tapestry of Egypt, never meant to stand out, but impossible to remove. The pharaoh, Nebmater, voice of the sun. In a chamber scented with myrrh and cedarwood, Pharaoh Nebmater, divine son of Ra, was an old man. He had ruled for 30 seasons. He had seen uprisings, floods, and foreign threats. His armies had marched east into Canaan and south into Cush. His temples stretched across the land like roots of a sacred tree. But now he sat alone. His courtiers flattered. His priests obeyed. His children plotted, waiting like vultures. He trusted only his cat, Baudet, who leapt onto his lap with a purr. In his youth, he had raised monuments. In his age, he raised questions. Will my name endure? He asked the night. Will I stand among the stars, or be forgotten in the dust? He summoned his architect and commanded a tomb unlike any before. He summoned his scribe and ordered his deeds inscribed in gold. But in his dreams, it was not the afterlife that haunted him. It was the boy he once was, running barefoot by the Nile, before he was crowned a god. As the night falls again, the stars turned. The priests counted time by the rising of Sirius. The tomb builders worked by torchlight. In the markets, lovers whispered in shadows. In the desert, jackals howled. And in every corner of Egypt, from slave to king, one truth bound them all. Life is short, but memory is eternal. And so they worked, and so they prayed, and so they lived. Part 4. Whispers beneath the lotus moon. Night had fallen across the Nile. A pale crescent moon floated above the black water, like a silver boat, quiet and knowing. The village of Probastet slept beneath its gaze, but Egypt never truly slept. In the shadows of temples and tombs, markets and marshes, stories stirred. Not just those of kings and scribes, but of dancers, thieves, dreamers, and those who walked between light and darkness. The temple dancer, Satra, daughter of grace. By day, Satra was silent as a statue, weaving garlands of papyrus flowers in the shade of the temple courtyard. But by night, she became living poetry. Drums throbbed, flutes sang, the fires burned low. Before the goddess Hathor's golden idol, Satra moved, arms like river reeds, feet light as desert wind, veils fluttering like wings. Hers was no vulgar dance. It was sacred. She did not dance to entertain. She danced to commune. Each movement was a prayer. Each spin a tribute to beauty, love, and the pulse of life. The priests chanted. The crowd held its breath. Satra's eyes were closed, and in her mind, she was no longer of flesh, but of flame and fragrance and stardust. She belonged to the gods. And when the final drumbeat faded, she bowed, breathless, spent, divine. She returned to her chamber alone, and wept without knowing why. The thief, Menkai, friend of shadows. In the alleys of Thebes, where the stone houses leaned close together and the dogs barked at empty air, a figure darted beneath the moonlight. Menkai, lean, clever, forgotten by all but the city guards, knew every crack in the walls of the noble houses. He slipped over rooftops like a whisper. Gold amulets, spice jars, silk robes, these were his currency, his survival. By day, he sold stolen rings in the market, claiming they were heirlooms from his grandmother. By night, he drank beer with the grave robbers near the necropolis, trading stories of curses and Pharaoh's wrath. One evening, he crept into a tomb too deep, too old. He reached for a golden scarab and felt a breath on his neck. Cold, ancient, watching. He fled that place and never returned. But he began to dream strange things, of jackals with human eyes and stars that whispered his true name. The Nubian merchant's daughter, Kalila, born of two lands. At the southern edge of Egypt, near the trading city of Elephantine, the scent of incense and cinnamon filled the air. There, Kalila walked through the market stalls with her head high. Her father was Nubian, her mother Egyptian. Some called her foreign. Some called her blessed. She called herself both. She spoke 3 tongues, Nubian, Egyptian, and the clipped dialect of the desert caravans. Her skin was dark bronze, her eyes wide with curiosity. She traded in perfumes, lapis stones, and fine ivory. Every evening, she listened to the stories of travelers returning from Kush, Babylon, and the Red Sea. She dreamed not of marriage or temples, but of maps. Of ships with sails shaped like falcon wings. Of cities built on mountains. She kept a secret scroll under her sleeping mat, drawn in charcoal, sketched with stars. One day, she would leave the Nile behind. One day, she would follow the setting sun. The old boatman, Seta, keeper of the current. Seta had rowed the Nile for over 60 years. His skin was wrinkled like sun-dried leather, his voice rough as gravel, and his arms stronger than a stonecutter's. He had ferried nobles and farmers, priests and prisoners. He had seen crocodiles glide beside him, their eyes gleaming in the dusk. He had watched lotus blossoms drift by like forgotten dreams. Seta believed the Nile spoke, not in words, but in rhythms. Its flood and fall were the breath of the world. Its silence carried secrets no man could understand. Now he rode alone most nights, humming old songs no one remembered. He spoke to the stars and poured a drop of wine into the river before every crossing. For those who did not return, he whispered each time. And still, Egypt endures. The wind blew through reeds. The statues stood tall. The jackals watched from the hills. In tombs, the dead whispered prayers. In palaces, kings dreamed of immortality. A dancer spun beneath sacred stars. A thief hid from gods he had mocked. A girl traced maps toward the unknown. And a boatman sang a lullaby to the river. Egypt lived on, not only in gold and glory, but in dust, in laughter, in footsteps in the sand. The cycle continued. The gods watched, and the Nile flowed. Part 5. Echoes in the Sand. Morning unfurled like papyrus, blank and wide, across the golden land of Kemet. In the hush before the heat, a jackal cried in the desert, and the temples opened their doors to the rising sun. Life resumed, not in grandeur always, but in labor, love, and longing. Beneath the tall pillars and beyond the pharaoh's gaze, stories continued, etched into the edges of ordinary days. The apprentice priest, Bek, seeker of the hidden word. Bek was 15, clothed in white linen, bald from recent purification, and full of questions he dared not speak. He served at the great temple of Ammonius in Karnak, rising before dawn to sweep the halls and polish the sacred statues. He prepared incense, filled the offering bowls, and learned the chants passed down for centuries. But in secret, Bek watched the stars. He read scrolls forbidden to novices. He listened to the old gardener, who claimed the gods once walked among men and were now deaf to prayer. One night, as he climbed the roof of the sanctuary and watched Sirius rise above the eastern hills, he whispered, "Are you real? Or are we alone in this world of stone?" A breeze stirred. A falcon cried. In that moment, something passed through him. Not a voice, not a vision, but a weight, ancient and wordless. He did not understand it. Not yet. But the gods had heard. The war widow, Aset, mother of memory. In a quiet home near the town of Abydos, Aset ground barley with weary hands. Her husband, Hori, had died 3 years past, his bones lost on the eastern frontier where foreign blades met Egyptian shields. Each night, she lit a lamp before his stela and offered him beer and bread. Her son, now 9, asked questions she could not answer. Will he come back in dreams? Why did the gods take him? Will I be a soldier too? Aset said little. She simply held him close, let him listen to her heartbeat, and told stories of his father. Not as a warrior, but as a man who laughed, who sang, who once carved his name into the tamarisk tree beside the river. She stitched his Shapti dolls with care so that in the afterlife he would not labor alone. And when she prayed, her voice was soft but strong. Watch him, Osiris. Let him rest. And let him wait for me. The plague keeper, Nebet, watcher of winds. In the crowded quarters of Memphis, illness had begun to spread. Not the wrath of Set, nor the poison of snakes, but the black cough, dry and choking, stealing breath from the old and the young alike. Nebet, a healer woman trained by priests of Sekhmet, walked among the sick with pomegranate paste, honeyed herbs, and prayers carved into palm leaf amulets. Her linen robes were stained with sweat and ash, and her eyes bore sleepless nights. She burned myrrh in clay bowls and whispered charms taught to her by her mother and her mother before her.
Some she saved.
Many she could not. But even as death bloomed like rot in the alleys, Nebbit stood firm. Not as a goddess, not as a miracle, but as a woman who refused to run. She buried the children with her own hands, wrapping them in linen, placing scarabs on their hearts, and singing to them softly. One evening, as the wind shifted and the fever broke, the people lit candles in her name, calling her Mother of Breath. She did not cry until it was over. The royal scribe, Panacea, recorder of time, in the palace hall, where golden doors reflected the light of Ra, Panacea wrote history. He did not shape events, but he preserved them. Each decree, each law, each triumph of Pharaoh was recorded by his ink-stained hand. He knew the weight of words. A name carved on stone would live forever. A lie, if written well enough, could outlast truth. Panacea feared this power more than any army. He had once been idealistic. Now he was careful. When Pharaoh ordered the erasure of his rival's cartouches, Panacea hesitated. But he was once your brother-in-law. He was once useful, Pharaoh said. Now he is forgotten. Panacea obeyed. His chisel scratched away the name from temple walls. But at night, in secret, he etched the truth on a hidden scroll. He buried it beneath a statue of Thoth. Let the gods decide, he whispered, what should be remembered. And the Nile flows on. Under the same stars, the river whispered. Children laughed, and old men sharpened fishing hooks. Temple bells rang. Papyrus boats drifted by like dreams set loose. A dancer retired to prayer. A thief fled south, hunted by spirits. A merchant girl sold incense and eyed the horizon. A priest watched the moon, uncertain if he believed. And the Nile, eternal mother, flowed through it all. She carried secrets no scroll could capture. She bore witness to love, grief, joy, and silence. She remembered what the world forgot. Part 6. The dust of the living, the silence of the dead. The sun climbed once more, burning like the eye of Ra across the rooftops of Probastet and beyond. Yet not all eyes looked upward. Some gazed downward, into the dust of tombs, into the secrets of the dead. For in Egypt, death was never the end. It was a journey, and every journey needed a guide. The embalmer, Kai, servant of stillness. Kai worked in the house of purification, a place heavy with quiet and frankincense. His hands were steady, his words few. He spoke more with linen and resin than with voice. The body before him today was that of a noblewoman, the Lady Neferu, now cold, her eyes sealed with shell paste, her lips kissed with natron. To some, she was gone. To Kai, she was becoming. He washed her in Nile water, recited spells from the Book of the Dead, and whispered to Anubis for favor. The work took 70 days. Drying, wrapping, painting, praying. A ritual of patience and reverence. He placed amulets over her heart, her hands, her throat. The scarab for truth. The eye for protection. The jed for stability. When at last she was ready, painted, perfumed, dressed in eternity, he watched the family weep as she was sealed in her tomb. But he knew she was not gone. She was only crossing. And he, quiet Kai, had shown her the door. The queen, I set no fret, she who waits in the shadows. In the palace at Pyramus, beneath walls painted in gold and blue, Queen I set no fret sat in silence. She was beautiful, yes, but sharper than any dagger. Her husband, Pharaoh Merneptah, ruled the two lands. But he was old, tired. His sons quarreled, his viziers whispered, and the court was full of rats. She played the game, hosting banquets, speaking softly, bearing children. But behind the veil, she plotted. She had sent messages to Thebes, to priests loyal to her family line. She had spoken in secret to commanders near the border. She had counted allies, weighed options, prepared for the inevitable. She did not seek power for its own sake. She sought balance. The gods must have order. And Egypt had begun to wobble. When Pharaoh closed his eyes for the last time, she did not cry. She simply stood, straightened her collar of turquoise beads, and whispered, "Now the real work begins." The child, Nebutai, the girl who dreamed of wings. In a mud-brick house by the river, 7-year-old Nebutai awoke screaming. Her mother rushed to her. "What is it?" "I saw the sky fall. The stars were birds. They came to take me away." Her mother hushed her, thinking it nonsense. But Nebutai's dreams had always come true. 3 nights later, lightning struck the tamarisk tree behind their home, though it had not rained in weeks. The village priest came to see her. He tested her with sacred riddles, gave her a dried fig, and watched her eyes. "She is touched by Net, the weaver of fate," he said. Soon, she was taken to the temple and Wazit to be trained as an oracle. She missed her brothers. She cried at night, but when she closed her eyes, she saw things no one else did. Floods before they came, names she'd never heard, faces of people long dead, and always the same whisper behind the veil of sleep. "You are not small, child. You are the thread." The tomb builder, Hapu, the man beneath the mountain. In the Valley of the Kings, Hapu carved stone by starlight. He was old now, his back bent, his fingers calloused like crocodile hide. But he had helped raise the tomb of 3 pharaohs. He had seen the walls painted with gods. He had dug tunnels where no light entered, only silence. He no longer spoke much. The other workers feared him, said he had seen too much. And they were not wrong. Once, deep in a sealed chamber, Hapu had found a crack in the wall. Behind it, a statue of Osiris no one remembered. It had no eyes, just empty holes, and when he touched it, the air grew still. Too still. Since then he dreamed of sand swallowing cities, of stars turning black, of being buried alive with no name. He worked now only in twilight, humming songs older than language. And when he died, they placed no name on his grave, only a carved sigil, a life, and that which lies beyond. And still, the Nile whispers. The day ended in a golden hush. Egrets flew low across the water. A herdsman played his flute by the reeds. Flames flickered in temple braziers. In Probastet, children fell asleep to lullabies. In Memphis, a new pharaoh took his throne. In the desert, winds howled over forgotten bones. And in the night sky, Orion climbed again, the eternal hunter. Egypt lived, not only in palaces or pyramids, but in the hearts of its people. In dancers and widows. In thieves and priests. In queens and quiet stonecutters. And so the story breathes on. Part 7. Shadows of Gods and Flames of Men. The moon hung low over the black water, casting silver trails across the Nile. In Thebes, torches flickered like stars fallen to earth. It was a night of celebration, the festival of Opet, when Ammonius of Karnak was carried in splendor from his temple to Luxor, among drums, dancers, and divine wine. But not all came to celebrate.
Some came to see,
Some to steal, and some to awaken forgotten things. The scribe, Chao, who read the forbidden lines. Chao was young, no older than 20, but his mind was sharp and his curiosity sharper still. He was assigned to the House of Life in Karnak, where scrolls older than kings whispered from shelves thick with dust. During the Opet procession, when the city's attention turned to light and wine, Chao slipped away. Deep beneath the temple, in a locked chamber of forgotten records, he searched by oil lamp. He had heard rumors. A scroll sealed under the reign of Akhenaten, the heretic king, hidden by priests who feared its words. And he found it, bound in black linen, sealed with the sign of Thoth. When he read it, his hands trembled. There shall come a day when the stars shift and the river runs red. The gods shall sleep, and the sun will hide. On that day, the words of power must be spoken by one born of ink and shadow. The oil lamp flickered. A whisper passed through the dark. You have read what must not be read. Chao ran, but the words followed. The archer, Mecca, Nubian blade in Pharaoh's hand. South of Thebes, in the fortress of Buhin, Mecca trained with the bow from dawn till dusk. a Nubian warrior conscripted into the pharaoh's army. He bore both pride and bitterness. To his men, he was captain. To Egyptians, he was foreign. To himself, he was a blade without a hilt. He served Pharaoh not for love, but for duty. Yet when raids came from the desert, Mecca's arrows struck truer than any. When an envoy's caravan was threatened, it was Mecca who led the rescue. In time, the people whispered, "The Black Falcon defends the border." And yet, in dreams, Mecca saw a fire swallowing temples. He stood alone against it, bow drawn, eyes fixed on a figure cloaked in stars. When he awoke, he remembered a name he had never heard.
Chow.
He did not know the scribe, but the gods were threading their fates together. The girl and the cat, Nefret, touched by Badat. In a small shrine behind the marketplace of Probastet lived a girl no older than 8. Nefret. Her name meant beautiful, but the people called her Eye of the Cat. She was strange. She spoke little to humans but held conversations with cats. They followed her, black, golden, striped, always a dozen at her heels. At night, she slept curled with them in the temple's warmest corner. She healed sick kittens. She found lost jewelry. She once hissed at a thief, and lightning struck his cart the next day. The priestesses believed she was chosen. Bastet's spirit lived in her. But some feared her. Eyes like moonstones, they whispered. She watches too much. One evening, during the Opet procession, Nefret vanished into the crowd. She was last seen staring at the bark of Ammonius, the god's statue towering with its gold-crowned head, as if seeing not a statue, but the god himself. And she smiled. The masked man, one who walks between. In the deepest hour of the night, when the torches had burned low and the songs faded into drunken laughter, a figure cloaked in jackalskin stood before the necropolis. No one knew his name. Some said he was a priest of Anubis, abandoned by his temple. Others claimed he was no man at all, but a spirit of vengeance, a soul never properly buried, returned to right ancient wrongs. He wore a mask of gold and onyx. In his hands, a staff etched with blood runes older than the pyramids. He whispered to the dead, and they whispered back. That night, he knelt before a sealed tomb, one built in haste, one never meant to be found. He placed an offering, a feather, a drop of wine, and a scroll. Xiao's name was on it. The threads of fate tightened. The gods stirred. And the river carries on. Morning came. Drunk dancers woke with ash in their mouths. Merchants swept up petals and coin. The temple drums were silent. But something had changed. In the sky, clouds gathered where none should be. The Nile lapped harder at its banks. The priests cast bones, and the patterns were wrong. Far to the south, Mecca was summoned to the capital. In Karnak, Xiao was missing. In the marketplace, the cats began to yowl, all at once, all in warning. And in the desert, the jackals lifted their heads to howl at a moon veiled in shadow. Part 8. The Tomb That Should Not Be Opened. The sun refused to rise. A low wind moved through the Valley of the Kings, whistling through tomb entrances like a whisper from the underworld. Clouds thickened over Thebes, rare, unsettling. Birds fell silent, and the sacred flame in Karnak's altar guttered, then died. The high priest of Ammonius spoke only one sentence. Something has awakened. Xiao, the scribe in the dark. Xiao ran until his legs gave out, until the scroll burned in his hands. He had fled Karnak with the forbidden text, the prophecy of the shifting sky, and now found himself standing before a sealed tomb in the cliffs beyond Deir el-Medina. The entrance was not marked. No cartouche. No offerings. No guardian statues. But he had dreamed of it. The door shaped like a lion's mouth. The black sun carved above it. The words, "Here lies he whose name must not be spoken." Xiao trembled. The scroll pulsed with warmth. It wanted to be here. It belonged here. But he did not. Still his hand reached forward. Fingers brushed the stone. The seal cracked. From within, a cold breath exhaled. And a voice, dry as sand and deep as the Nile, whispered.
Scribe.
Inkborn. Come. Mecca. March of the Nubian Hawk. In the fortress of Wazit, Mecca the archer stood fully armed, gold armband glinting beneath a gray sky. He had received Pharaoh's seal, a command to march north to Thebes to investigate unrest and rumors of sorcery. He took 30 men, all loyal, all silent. But as they rode through the desert path, a dust storm rose from the east, unnatural, thick, red as dried blood. The horses reared, men fell, and in the swirling cloud, shapes appeared, statues with moving heads, serpents with human arms, jackals that walked upright. Mecca drew his bow. His heart thundered, but his mind was calm. Hold the line, he ordered. We face demons or dreams, either way we stand. An arrow flew, a hiss, then silence. The storm passed, but 5 men were gone, and a symbol had been drawn in the sand, a circle within a triangle, the same sigil that haunted his dreams. Nefret, the cat's chosen. In Probastet, Nefret sat beneath the sacred fig tree behind the shrine. Her cats circled her, yowling with unease. One, old, blind, with a torn ear, jumped into her lap and stared with milky eyes.
Soon, it said.
Not in voice, but in thought. He rises. The priestesses tried to call her. The guards ignored her. But the cats knew, and they gathered. 50, 100. Some from across the river, some from the deep alleyways of Memphis. Feral, royal, spotted and black, all drawn by the same force. Nefret stood. I must go to the tomb. The cats followed. The city watched in silent dread as a child no taller than a soldier's spear walked south with an army of fur and fangs. The one in the mask. He waited in the necropolis, where the desert meets death. The one in jackalskin. The one with the staff of black cedar. He had many names, none true, but the dead called him the last voice. He knelt before a fire of green flame, reading the signs: bones, ash, feathers. The prophecy was moving now. It could not be stopped, only steered. He drew symbols in the sand, the same that appeared in Mecca's stream, the same burned into the scroll Shao carried. There were 4.
The scribe.
The warrior. The seer. The gatekeeper. And one more, the forgotten king. His tomb had opened. The stars shifted. The sun blinked. Time began to unravel. And the river stirs. The Nile turned a deeper color that evening. Not blood, not wine, but something older. Something born before the gods had names. Priests fasted. Nobles fled. The markets emptied. In Luxor, statues wept salt. In Memphis, the obelisks cracked. In a distant village, a woman gave birth to a child with eyes of gold. And through it all, the people whispered, "The end has begun," or "the beginning has returned." Part 9. The Tomb Below Time. Night had fallen hard across Thebes. But in the Valley of the Kings, it was darker still, for the seal was broken, and the tomb that should never have been found had opened. Inside, Zhao, the scribe, descended stone steps that had not felt a footfall in 1,000 years. The torch in his hand barely pierced the blackness. Every breath tasted of rot and secrets. The walls were covered in painted figures, but unlike any from the Book of the Dead or the walls of pharaohs. These were older, stranger. Not men but shapes, faceless beings with wings of bone, eyes like stars. Some with crowns of fire, some with open jaws, and the heavens inside. And all of them bowed before one central figure, a man in gold, seated on a throne of bones and serpents. His name was not written. Where the cartouche should have been was only one word, scratched into the stone in crude black ink. Return. Zhao stepped into the final chamber. There lay a sarcophagus the color of obsidian, chained shut with thick iron bands. The moment he entered, the chains groaned, and the scroll in his hand grew hot, pulsing like a heartbeat. Mecca, between blade and bone. South of the tomb, Mecca stood at a crossroads. He and his remaining soldiers had reached the necropolis, but something was wrong. The air shimmered. The sun's position no longer made sense. His men looked older or younger. Their shadows moved without them. "Time is bleeding," he whispered. A voice spoke from behind. It began when the scroll was read. Mecca turned, arrow knocked, but did not release. The man wore a jackal mask. In one hand, a black staff. In the other, a scroll of flesh. "You know my name," Mecca said. The figure nodded. "I have walked this story before. And I walk it again. You stand at the pivot. Will you serve the king or serve the truth?" Mecca lowered his bow slowly. "I serve Egypt." "Then come." "He is waking." Nefret, the voice of Baudet. Nefret arrived at the temple gates of Karnak just before sunrise, though the sun still refused to show itself. With her came not dozens, but hundreds of cats. They moved with eerie unity, forming a ring around the central courtyard. The high priestess approached, trembling. "Child, what are you?" Nefret's eyes gleamed silver. "I am her breath, her will, her claw." She stepped into the sanctuary, past guards too terrified to move. She reached the sacred pool and knelt. There, beneath the water surface, something blinked. Not a reflection, but another eye. A golden one. Slitted. Watching. The water boiled. Steam rose. And from it emerged a figure with the head of a lioness, draped in silk and smoke. Baudet. The goddess leaned close and whispered into Nefret's ear. "He wakes, little seer, and only you may silence him, or serve him." The tomb breathes. Back in the tomb, Zhao stood frozen. The sarcophagus moved. The iron bands snapped, one by one, screaming like metal tortured by fire. The lid began to rise. No hands touched it. From the dark within rose a smell of frankincense and decay. And then a voice, smooth, regal, cruel, echoed across the stone. "Who reads my name becomes part of it." The room shook. Dust poured from the ceiling. The walls bled black ichor. Zhao backed away, but the scroll was now floating, unraveling midair, the symbols glowing in flame. Each word spoken aloud, in a voice not his own. "I am he who ruled before gods walked. I am the flame beneath the sand. I am Pharaoh forgotten. I am the end that was buried." From the sarcophagus, a figure began to rise. Crowned in gold, eyes hollow and burning, skin of stone and ink. The forgotten king had returned. The four threads tighten. New Moon Zhao, no longer a mere scribe, marked by prophecy, bound to the king's resurrection. New Moon Mecca, warrior torn between loyalty to Pharaoh and a fate larger than nations. New Moon Nefret, seer touched by divinity, walking the line between innocence and power. New Moon the Jackal, the masked guide who walks both life and death, watching, waiting. And overhead, the stars spun in wrong directions. Time bent. Light dimmed. In Memphis, statues toppled. In the Delta, crocodiles turned on fishermen. And in the sky, a second sun appeared. But it gave no warmth, only dread. Part 10. The King Who Remembered Too Much. In the tomb beyond death, Zhao collapsed to his knees. Before him stood the forgotten king, now fully risen from the sarcophagus. His body shimmered with unnatural life, gold inlaid with black veins, hieroglyphs moving across his skin like whispers on papyrus. His eyes were hollow, yet deep, pulling in the very light around them. The scroll, now ash, had done its work. The chamber pulsed like a heart. Dust danced in patterns only the dead could read. "You are not of this age," Zhao whispered. The king stepped forward. "I am of all ages. I ruled when the stars were young. I watched the first man shape mud into prayer. I knew gods before they bore names. And I was betrayed." He lifted a hand. Zhao felt his blood slow. 7 dynasties buried me. 9 pharaohs erased my image. But sand forgets slowly. And ink remembers. He touched Zhao's forehead. "Your ink has called me back." And in that moment, Zhao saw it all. Not as visions, but as if he lived it. A throne surrounded by flame. Armies of jackal-headed men kneeling. The gods themselves bowing in a stormlit court. A betrayal, not by man, but by Ma'at herself, the very order of the cosmos. And the carving of a single word onto stone with the blood of time. Erased. Mecca. In the city that shouldn't be. Mecca followed the jackal-masked figure down a narrow path, and the sands parted, revealing not desert, but a buried city, glowing with faint blue light. Its towers were wrong, curved like ribs, its streets built in spirals. No map knew of this place. This was his city, the jackal said. Whose? Mecca asked. But he already knew. Statues of the forgotten king lined the causeways. But each had its face clawed off. Why did they destroy him? Because he remembered too much. Because he knew before the gods arrived. Mecca paused before a great mural, half buried in dust. It showed 4 figures around the king. A scribe with ink-stained hands. A warrior with a lion's helm. A seer cloaked in stars. And a beast with no shape at all. Prophecy, Mecca muttered. No, said the jackal. History. Mecca turned sharply. What do you want from me? Only this. When the king speaks, will you kneel or strike? Nefret, the test of flame and fur. Nefret entered the inner sanctum of the Temple of Badat, a place no one had dared to walk for generations. The cats followed still, silent, watchful. Inside was a great mirror, ringed with golden fur. Badat appeared within, not as the gentle mother cat, but the warrior lioness, her claws wet with blood. Nefret, she purred, daughter of scent and shadow. You are ready. For what? To choose. The mirror swirled. 2 futures appeared. One, a golden city, ruled by the forgotten king, where peace and eternity reigned, but freedom was an illusion, and all bowed to one will. 2, a broken land, with temples in ruin, but humanity free to rise, to fall, to remember. Will you serve him? Badat asked. He would keep death away. Even I cannot do that. Nefret looked into the mirror. She saw herself beside the king, robed in stars, eternal, untouched by age. Then she saw herself walking barefoot among the ruins, human, mortal, and smiling. I don't know, she whispered. Then you are ready, Badat said. And vanished. The forgotten king speaks. Xiao emerged from the tomb at dusk. But the sun did not greet him. Instead, the second sun still hung in the sky, cold, unmoving, like an eye. Behind him, the king stepped into the light. And across Egypt, every statue crumbled. Every temple trembled. Every priest dropped to the floor in agony. Hear me, the king said, though he did not shout. Children of the Nile, I have returned, not as conqueror, but as keeper. Your gods have lied. Your pharaohs have chained me. I offer a truth beyond death. In the delta, a crocodile rose from the Nile and spoke his words. In the Red Sea, the waves formed glyphs of his name. In the markets of Memphis, blind men cried out in joy, and cats vanished from the rooftops. And deep below Karnak, the sacred scrolls began to rewrite themselves. And elsewhere, the jackal knelt beside a forgotten altar and whispered, "The wheel turns again." Mecca found a blade older than iron, buried beneath the ribs of a giant beast. Nefret opened her mouth, and a different voice spoke through her. The stars rearranged into an eye, weeping black light. And in a distant tomb never touched by sand or time, a hand began to move. It was not human. It was older, and it remembered the king. Part 11. The Blood in the Sand. In the north, Mecca, at the gates. The buried city had opened its ribs to Mecca, and still he walked its spiraled streets. Now, before him loomed the Gate of Silence, a monument taller than pyramids, formed from a single black stone. Etchings of unknown beasts danced across it, and at its center, a door carved not with symbols, but with moving shadows. The jackal walked beside him, silent for once. Beyond this gate, the guide said, is the place where the king hid his heart. Mecca placed a hand on the gate. It was warm. Why would he hide it? Because it was not his to begin with. And the door opened. Inside, a storm of light and darkness held silently, and in its center floated a black crystal the size of a man's skull. Mecca stepped forward, but before he could speak, a voice erupted from the crystal. You are not him, but you carry the echo. And Mecca's hand glowed, the mark of the king blazing bright. The jackal turned, alarmed. You touched the scroll, didn't you? Mecca nodded slowly, and the crystal laughed. In Thebes, Nefret wakes the wind. Atop the highest pillar of Karnak, Nefret sat, watching the false sun hover motionless in the eastern sky. The cats were gone now, save for one, an ancient black tom who never blinked. Inside her, the voice still stirred. Not Baudet. Something deeper. Something waiting. Below, priests screamed and offered sacrifices to statues that no longer answered. Nefret rose. Her skin shimmered like the night sky. She began to chant, not in Egyptian but in the first language, the tongue of the gods before names. And the wind answered. Dust rose across the city. The river curled back on itself. Children saw her form in the clouds. And from the far dunes, the true gods turned their gaze. In Memphis, the dead began to walk. In the necropolis beyond Memphis, the ground cracked open. Not just bones, but whole figures rose. Mummies with minds. Guardians bound in bronze and silence. Eyes of obsidian. They stood in formation, facing the east toward Thebes.
Toward the king.
A high priest, half dead himself, screamed. He summons the sleepers. The eternal guard. The army of the first throne. The people fled. But some, the old, the mad, the dreamers, began to follow the dead. As if remembering something they were never told. Chow. The ink that sees. Chow now walked the sands alone, or so it seemed. His eyes no longer saw only what was in front of him. He saw layers. A city buried beneath every city. A time beneath every moment. Voices followed him. The voices of past scribes, bound to the same fate. He reached a forgotten temple, no name, no god, just a spiral staircase descending into black. He followed it down, and at its bottom, a room of mirrors. Each showed a different Egypt. One ruled by the forgotten king. One ruled by Nefret, crowned and fierce. One ruled by fire and beasts. And one empty. No sun, no Nile, no people, only sand. In each mirror, he stood beside the throne. Chow fell to his knees. I didn't ask for this. A voice from behind him said, None of us do. But ink remembers. He turned. The jackal stood in the mirror. But his reflection wore a crown. The forgotten king's command. From the heart of Thebes, the king's voice echoed across the land. The Nile shall run backward. The stars shall rearrange. The gods shall kneel. And all who walk in sand shall remember my name. The pyramids cracked. The great sphinx opened its mouth and howled. In the desert, the red comet returned, burning bright with unnatural flame. And across every temple, every tablet, every sacred scroll, one word appeared in black ink. Return. Elsewhere, in the underworld, Anubis looked up from the scales. He has changed the balance. The sun god Ra dimmed his light, whispering to Horus, We are not the first. We may not be the last. Batet prowled the dream realms, claws bared, hunting something she had once called brother. And in a hut by the Nile, a child was born with eyes of gold and no shadow. The four must choose. New Moon Mecca, bearing the mark, torn between blade and loyalty. New Moon Chow, the chronicler whose pen shapes fate itself. New Moon Nefret, voice of a deeper power, one even the gods fear. New Moon the jackal, guide, trickster, king in shadow. The world trembles. The past breaks through the present. And time, once a river, now coils like a serpent, ready to strike. Part 12. The day the Nile wept. The boy with golden eyes. Far from Thebes, In a quiet fishing village, once untouched by gods or kings, a cry pierced the early morning air. A child had been born, but no midwife dared hold him. His eyes were gold, not just in color but in glow, like molten sun. His skin held strange markings that changed even as they looked. And most strange of all, the child cast no shadow, not even in firelight. The villagers wept and prayed. Some fled, but one old woman, bent with age and wisdom, stayed behind. She wrapped the child in linen and whispered, "You have returned, little one, but not as you were." Far above, the false sun pulsed, once, then twice, as if in answer. And across the sky, a new constellation formed. Not a jackal, not a lion, but an eye and a tear beneath it. Xiao in the Library of Bone. Deep below the ruins of a temple no one remembered, Xiao walked the halls of the Library of Bone, where every scroll was etched on rib, femur, or skull. The scribes here were dead, but not gone. Whispers filled the air. "Write it. Speak it. Bring him back." Xiao approached the grand spine, the massive vertebrae of an ancient beast coiled around a central table. There, resting on a slab of polished jawbone, lay a single quill, black as void, made from a feather not of bird, but something older. He picked it up. Instantly, ink poured from the walls. Not liquid, but memory.
He saw
A desert that was once ocean. The first man crowned. The betrayal of the king, by gods clothed in stars. The king tearing out his own heart and sealing it inside a riddle. And the birth of the true enemy. Deeper still, he gasped. It wasn't the gods who feared him. It was what he sealed. The scribes whispered louder now. "Finish the sentence. Write the last name. Only then can the end begin." Xiao bent over the bone and began to write. Nefret in the Garden of Tears. The sacred cats returned to Nefret.
silent.
Watchful. She now stood in the Garden of Tears, a mythical place said to lie outside of time, where every flower was watered by a weeping god. Here, the ground bloomed not with petals, but with memories. She knelt beside a lotus that pulsed with silver. And she remembered, being born beneath a full moon, dreaming of pyramids that floated in the sky. The moment Baudet touched her soul, not in blessing, but in warning. "You are the vessel," the wind whispered, "but not the only one." From behind the trees stepped a girl, her same face, but younger. Innocent, afraid. "What are you?" Nefret asked. The girl smiled sadly. "I am what you could be, if you choose him." And suddenly, the garden withered. The cats hissed. And the girl opened her mouth, revealing not teeth, but stars. Nefret drew her blade of obsidian. And the battle began, not of flesh, but of souls. Mecca faces the king. Within the gate of silence, Mecca stood before the black crystal, the king's heart. And the king himself stepped through the veil of light, not robed, not crowned, barefoot, ancient, eyes that had seen every rise and fall. "You've come to kill me?" he asked. "I came to choose," Mecca said. The king nodded. "I was like you once. Chosen, mortal, hopeful. Then the gods lied, and I became what I had to." Mecca lifted his sword, the one shaped from memory, not metal. "You enslaved death. I freed it. No one wanted truth, only comfort." Silence. Then Mecca asked, "What did they fear most?" The king's voice dropped to a whisper, "That I would tell the world where gods come from." Mecca paused. The blade trembled in his hand, and the heart pulsed. The sky splits. All across Egypt, from the deserts to the delta, people looked up. The false sun blinked and cracked like glass. Through the fracture poured darkness, shaped like fire, fire shaped like wings. The stars fled, and a voice, neither god nor man, whispered across the land. "The seal is breaking." In the halls of Osiris, judges dropped their scales. In the underworld, something stirred in the deepest tomb, older than gods, older than life. The king looked up from the crystal. "They come." The child speaks. In the fishing hut, the child with golden eyes opened his mouth. And in a voice of many echoes, he said, I am not him. I am what comes after. And I will remember the gods to death. Part 13. The Hollow Throne. Atop the broken pyramid, the sands had begun to rise, not blown by wind, but pulled toward the sky. In the far west, the oldest of pyramids, long collapsed and buried, began to stir. Stones lifted themselves, stacking anew. Hieroglyphs burned upon their surfaces, symbols older than the dynasties, older than words. At the top sat a throne of bone, polished and glistening in the false sunlight. It waited, but not for the king, not for any god. It waited for her. Nefret's shadow duel. In the withered garden of tears, Nefret fought not with steel, but with memory. The girl who mirrored her, the one of stars and sadness, grew stronger with each heartbeat. She bled no blood, only light, and her voice echoed in Nefret's skull. You were born to contain what others fear. Nefret's eyes glowed. The power inside her flared, not from Badat, not from gods, but from something deeper. I was not born to contain it, she snarled, slicing through the reflection. I was born to unleash it. And with that, she spoke a forbidden name. Not written in any scroll, not carved on any temple. The garden shattered. The sky above Thebes darkened, and Badat herself, prowling the heavens, paused. She remembers. Shao and the ink of time. Shao now wrote upon walls that bled. Every word he inscribed took shape in the world. He tested it. Let the Nile slow, and it obeyed. Let the sun dim, and the false sun flickered. Let Mecca choose, and across the land, Mecca fell to one knee, gripped by sudden clarity. But as he wrote, the quill screamed, not in sound but in weight. Each word drained years from his life. He aged rapidly. His skin cracked. His bones ached. He tried to stop, but the ink would not let him. On the wall, a sentence appeared on its own. Write until the world ends or begins again. Shao wept and wrote on. Mecca's choice. The forgotten king stood before him. Behind the king, the army of the dead, the eternal guard, the sleepless pharaohs. Before him, the black crystal heart pulsing with memory, betrayal, and power. Mecca held the blade made from time itself. The king asked, Will you become me? Mecca hesitated. In his mind, he saw visions. Nefret on the throne of bone, her crown a cage of stars. Shao collapsing as cities rewrote themselves. The child, neither god nor man, walking toward Memphis as people bowed, weeping without knowing why. Mecca whispered, I choose. He drove the blade not into the king, but into the heart. The world trembled. The pyramids moaned. And something beneath all of Egypt woke up. Below the underworld, the nameless one stirs. Even the gods do not speak of this place. It lies beyond Duat, deeper than the final judgment, where no souls tread and no prayers reach. There, in a chamber of black stone and endless mirrors, something had been watching. It was not a god. It was not a demon. It was the first watcher, the one who remembered before memory. It was time unbound, death unshaped, thought unspoken. And now it began to rise. The forgotten king felt it. His eyes widened.
No, not that.
Not it. But it was too late. A voice echoed through every stone, every skull, every name. I am the ending you tried to stop. The child walks on water. Across the Nile, now still as glass, the child with golden eyes walked, each step leaving ripples of fire. Behind him trailed the animals of Egypt, crocodiles, lions, ibises, and serpents. They followed not in fear, but in recognition. Villagers watched from the banks, some weeping, some singing songs they did not know they knew. He reached the shore, looked north,
and smiled.
The throne is empty. The stars rearrange. That night, if it could be called night under the cracked sun, the heavens changed. The constellations bled into new shapes. A crown burning, a pen broken, a child rising, a god falling, a door opening. The priests screamed, the temples shattered. The gods, in their hidden realms, began to choose sides. Some would follow the king again, some would follow the child, and some would seek the nameless one in secret. Epilogue, a whisper to the sand. In the deep desert, an old woman lit a fire. She whispered to it, 3 thrones, 1 heart broken, 1 pen bleeding, 1 child reborn, and the 4th not yet revealed. The fire hissed. She placed a single black stone in the flames. It turned white, and on it, written in no ink at all, appeared a single word. Soon. Part 14. The door beneath all doors. In the valley where no map reaches. Far beyond the pyramids, past the last oasis and through dunes that swallow time, there lies a valley carved not by water or wind, but by memory. The ancients called it Shakatenefa, the scar of the beautiful lie. No birds fly here. No insects hum. The very air forgets how to breathe. Here, Zhao's ink flows freely on the bones of the world. A scroll unfolds endlessly in the sand, written in his hand, though he no longer remembers doing so. And on that scroll is a name no priest dares say. A name that never appeared in the Book of the Dead. A name not written, but felt, like a thorn in the soul. Zhao looks at it, and begins to weep black tears. It was never about the king. It was about what he buried. Nefret and the throne of bone. Nefret stands now at the top of the reborn pyramid. Around her, the sky has turned to deep bronze, the clouds hanging low like the breath of forgotten gods. The throne of bone calls to her, but so does something else, something beneath it. A pulse in the stone, like a heartbeat. The cats that follow her stop. They hiss. One turns to dust. She ignores the warning. Her hand touches the throne. And suddenly, she is no longer in her body. She is in the first chamber. The first chamber, birth of the gods. A room before time, before stars, before Egypt. She sees a desert of stars, a throne of silence, a single figure wrapped in black linen, with a mirror for a face. Around it, the gods being born from thought, from lies, from the fear of mortals. And she sees the king, once mortal, kneeling before this figure. The figure speaks without sound. You want to protect them? Then give me your name. And the king does. From that moment on, he is nameless. Not forgotten. Erased. That is the price of keeping the nameless one sealed. Nefret snaps back into her body, gasping. The throne is burning her palm. Her eyes are gold. And on her arm, a mark appears. The eye that sees beneath. Mecca's trial of the sunken god. After piercing the crystal heart, Mecca has fallen into a place no light touches. There is no ground.
No sky.
Only endless, echoing breaths, not his own. The voice of the king is gone. The weight of his destiny gone. In this abyss, Mecca must now face the sunken god, the one the king sealed below all tombs. The one the gods deny exists. It does not speak in words. It speaks in choices. 1,000 versions of Mecca appear before him. Cruel, weak, kind, mad, cowardly, victorious. All screaming. All begging. Which are you? The god asks. Mecca answers by drawing his blade, now pure light, no longer memory, and cuts through the illusions. I am not one choice. I am every failure that still stands. The god laughs, and opens an eye in the void. The child who cannot be named. The child with golden eyes now stands at the edge of Memphis, where the great statues of the gods once towered. They bow before him now, crumbling, shifting. He steps forward and places his hand on the altar of Ta. The stone melts, and beneath it, an obsidian egg, older than the world, etched with the same eye that burns on Nefret's skin. The egg speaks, not aloud, but inside the bones of all who live. You are not a rebirth. You are a reckoning. The child smiles. and says his first true name. I am Kasef, the unmaking. The egg cracks, and across the world, every mummy in every tomb opens its eyes. The forgotten king's regret. From the ruins of the underworld, the forgotten king stumbles upward, weaker now, half memory, half man. He speaks into the sand. I made a mistake. I tried to save them by killing death. But death was never the enemy. The enemy is what comes after life. He looks to the sky and sees it split. Through it marches not the gods, not the dead, but a third force, clothed in silence, eyes like mirrors, bodies like glass. The old gods shudder in their heavens, because these are the firstborn, the ones who were erased before even the myths were written, and they are here to reclaim Egypt. The stars abandon the sky. One by one, the stars vanish, not behind clouds, not by eclipse. They go out, as if devoured by something crawling across the edge of the universe. Priests fall silent. Temples collapse in on themselves. The Book of the Dead begins rewriting itself, pages vanishing, names disappearing. And in every village, people wake from the same dream. A throne, a golden child, a girl with a cat's shadow, a man holding the sun in his hand, and the world ending in silence, not fire. Epilogue. The door opens. Deep beneath the throne of bone, behind all doors ever sealed, something ancient unlocks. A door that was not built, a door that was remembered. From the other side comes not sound, but absence. Then the footstep, and a whisper in every tongue. This is the end of forgetting. Part 15. The awakening of that which was erased. Where gods refuse to look. In the crypt below Memphis, deeper than any tomb, beneath even the black chambers where priests once whispered curses, the obsidian egg now lay cracked open. From within, it had not birthed a beast, nor a god, but a memory so ancient it had grown teeth. The child, Kasef, stood beside it. His golden eyes no longer shimmered with innocence but with knowing, the kind no mortal should possess. He reached into the hollow shell and pulled forth a shard of darkness that pulsed like a living heart. It beat once, and across the land, every temple bell rang at once, even those long broken and buried. The priests called it an omen, but the old woman in the desert whispered the truth. It is not an omen. It is the return of the first forgetting. Nefret and the River of Names. Nefret, now marked by the eye beneath, stood before a river that flowed upward into the stars, the River of Names. It was not water. It was ink. Every droplet shimmered with a name written, spoken, or dreamt throughout Egypt's history. She saw names drift past, pharaohs, slaves, poets, traders, lovers, gods. She reached out. The river recoiled. Then a voice, the same voice that had once echoed in her chamber when she was only a girl chosen by Badet, spoke again. To take a name is to hold its truth, but to take all names is to become the lie itself. Nefret stepped into the river. The ink clung to her like a second skin, and behind her, statues wept black tears. Mecca and the eye of the sunken god. Mecca stood now within the pupil of the abyss, the very eye of the sunken god. It did not look at him. It looked through him. He was shown visions not of the past, but of all possible pasts, timelines where he failed, where he never drew the blade, where Egypt burned, where Nefret never lived, where the child was born as a godslayer. He screamed, and the eye spoke. You are not chosen. You are the crack through which fate leaks. Then it offered him a single shard of something divine, a sliver of time before the world was named. Mecca took it. It became a weapon in his hand, a blade not of metal or magic, but of possibility. The forgotten king before the mirror-faced one. The forgotten king wandered the white desert, seeking the edge of the map where reality frayed. There, beneath the sky that forgot its stars, he found the mirror-faced one, the being to whom he once gave his name in a bargain that sealed Egypt's fate. The figure still sat upon its silent throne, unmoving. But now it turned. Its face, a flawless mirror, showed him not his reflection, but all the faces he could have worn. Farmer. Tyrant.
Father. Corpse.
The king fell to his knees. I tried, he whispered. I tried to buy peace. The mirror-faced one finally spoke. Peace was never yours to purchase. You bargained with memory, and now memory comes for its price. The king's crown shattered, and on his forehead appeared a mark, the mark of the first mistake. The return of the firstborn. In the temples of Luxor, where the walls still whispered of creation, the sky split open like papyrus torn by unseen hands. From the rent heavens descended the firstborn, tall and silent, eyes of mirrored light, skin like glass smoothed by eternity. They did not speak. They only remembered. And when they stepped upon the sacred stones, the statues of the gods cracked and fell, for even the divine were ashamed to be seen by them. The firstborn began to walk the land, collecting something. Not gold, not lives, but names. Every village they passed forgot who they were. Every mother forgot her child's name. Every tombstone turned blank. They were not conquerors. They were the reclaimers of silence. The weeping of the Nile. The Nile turned red, not with blood, but with ink. All the waters now carried words unspoken, memories drowned, prayers unanswered. Fishermen wept. Crocodiles sang. The dead rose from the riverbed, not to haunt, but to warn. We remember. You must not. And the river whispered to the sky. The name Eater has awakened. Khsef, the unmaking. The child once called Khsef now stood on the peak of the Black Pyramid, arms outstretched to a sky that refused to shine. His body shimmered with memories not lived, his hair crowned with stars that did not belong to this world. Behind him rose a throne without form, shifting, flickering, never stable. He turned to the people, the priests, the prophets, the warriors, the poor who knelt below, entranced. He did not ask for worship. He asked for truth. And when none could offer it, he wept. Not with sorrow, but with resolve. He opened his arms, and the world began to unwrite itself. Epilogue. The scribe who refused to forget. Far away, in a cave where the wind carries no sound, a blind scribe dips his finger into blood and writes one word on the wall again and again. Remember.
His body is dust.
His heart does not beat, but his hand still moves. And his final sentence, half-finished, reads, When the child unmakes the world, only the one who remembers. The wall cracks, and the cave falls silent. Part 16. The War of Names. The night of the blank moon. There was no moon that night. Not hidden, not waning, simply gone. The stars, too, had begun to vanish one by one, each snuffed out like a candle under a god's breath. And in the temple of Thoth, where once scribes recorded every breath and birth, the high priest slit his palm and scrawled a final truth across the alabaster walls. He who controls the names controls the world. But what if the world no longer remembers itself? The ink bled downward, pooled at his feet, and from it rose a whisper. Then the world becomes dream, and dream, in time, becomes enemy. Nefret, queen of ink. Nefret now ruled a city without name, built from memory, veiled in smoke and script. Her body bore the river's mark, black vines of flowing language wrapped around her arms and throat. She no longer slept. In dreams, she wrote. Each night, she composed false histories to throw off the firstborn. Tales of gods who never lived. Battles that never happened. A king made of salt and starlight. And each lie, spoken aloud, became briefly real. Enough to confuse the reclaimers of silence. Enough to stall the great unmaking. But each lie cost her. A memory. A loved one. A moment of who she used to be. Soon, she would forget her own name. But until then, she would write the world back into being. Mecca and the blade of what could have been. Mecca wandered the path of possible pasts, a hidden trail across the desert where every grain of sand showed another choice not taken. Here, time fractured. He saw echoes of himself, a farmer who never held a sword, a tyrant crowned by gods, a boy who died before any of this began. And with each step, his blade pulsed, fed by potential. He came to the gates of Abydos, where the firstborn were gathering to rewrite reality itself. But the gate was sealed by a question. What did the first man say before he knew language? Mecca thought long. Then he spoke not with words, but with silence. A silence shaped like a child's cry. The gate opened, and he stepped into war. Kasef, the child who forgets. Kasef now sat on the black throne, high above the earth, surrounded by echoes of names once held sacred. He spoke to no one. He only listened, to the winds that no longer blew,
To the stars that no longer sang.
to the bones of gods, buried deep beneath forgotten pyramids. One bone still hummed. He picked it up, a finger bone of Ra, last of the skyfire. It spoke. I gave you light, and you returned me night. I gave you law, and you returned me silence. Kasef nodded. I return only what was stolen, he whispered. And with that, he erased Ra's name from the world. Across Egypt, the sun flickered, then went cold. The forgotten king and the ghost of his daughter. In the Valley of Broken Crowns, the forgotten king buried his final companion, a lioness that had walked with him since the gods fell. He was alone, until she came, a girl with eyes like dusk, holding a single ankh made of crystal. Do you remember me, father? She asked. The king wept. I do not, he said, but I have dreamed of your voice for 1,000 years. She offered the ankh. Then take this. It holds a memory not of you, but of what you could still become. He touched it, and in that moment, he saw the world before the gods, before Egypt, before even time, and he remembered the first sin, not killing, not lying, but naming. The return of the crocodile god. In the flooded ruins of Kamambo, where the Nile now surged upward, a rumble tore through the waters, and from the depths rose Sobuk, god of strength, vengeance, and protection, but not as he once was. His body now bore scars from dreams long torn, his eyes burned with black flame, and around his neck were the keys of memory. The firstborn turned to stop him, but Sobuk bit down and swallowed their names whole. They screamed, and in their silence, the world shivered. He roared to the heavens. You thought us myths. Now you will choke on our truth. And the Nile surged, drowning both hope and horror. The gathering storm. Across the sands, a final gathering began. Nefret, now nearly forgotten, but still writing. Mecca, blade drawn, walking through dreams toward the throne. The forgotten king, ankh in hand, memory returning. Sobuk, bloodied but rising. And above them all, Kasef, the child of erasure. They would meet at the place without maps, where no god had ever stood. And the world, if it still had one, would watch. Because what came next was not salvation, not even destruction, but a choice. Part 17. The place without maps. The desert that does not exist. There is a place the wind avoids. A stretch of sand where compasses spin, stars disappear, and the gods lose their tongues. It is called a place without maps. Not because it was never mapped, but because every map that tried to name it caught fire in its maker's hand. Here, the last players in the game of names arrive, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as questions seeking an answer. Nefret, her skin lined with flowing script, her voice nearly forgotten. Mecca, carrying a blade made from all that could have been. The forgotten king, heavy with the ankh of what still might be remembered. Sobuk, his body steaming, ancient blood still fresh on his teeth. And upon a throne of silence, Kasef, the child who never should have been remembered. They do not speak, because here, words betray. Even thinking too loudly can change the desert's shape. Nefret's last page. Nefret kneels and opens her final scroll. The parchment is blank. She has written 1,000 truths, 1,000 lies, 1,000 illusions to slow the reclaimers of silence. But now, ink refuses to flow. Her fingers tremble. She dips her finger into her own blood. If words are dying, she whispers, then let memory bleed. She writes one sentence. Not to confuse, not to hide, but to remember. My name is Nefret, daughter of fire, and I choose to burn. The scroll ignites, and the desert, for a moment, becomes a library of flame. Each ember carries a word,
A name,
a laugh, a grief,
a kiss.
and the world, just briefly, remembers warmth. Mecca faces the child. Mecca steps forward. Kasef watches, his eyes twin wells of unspoken time. I have no wish to slay you, Mecca says. Kasef replies, then why carry that which could? Mecca lifts the blade, made of possibility. This is not for killing. It is for choosing. And with one strike, he does not attack, but instead cuts open the air beside the child. A doorway opens. A door to a world where Kasef never existed. A world of peace. Of forgotten gods sleeping quietly beneath still skies. Kasef trembles. I could have been nothing? Mecca nods. And sometimes nothing is mercy. The forgotten king speaks a forbidden name. The king approaches last. No longer dressed in gold or crowned with lies. He wears sand and silence. But in his hands, he carries the ink given by the ghost of his daughter. He holds it high and speaks a name that has not been uttered since before Egypt's first breath. A name no god dares remember. A name so old it was the first mistake. The moment it leaves his lips, the sky shatters. The stars fall like ash. The earth weeps blood and ink. Even Kasef recoils, clutching his ears. What have you done? He cries. The king replies, I spoke the name that undoes the lie. The name of before. Sobuk, the last guard. The ground splits. From the cracks crawl the firstborn, twisted now, their bodies misshapen by memory devoured. They chant no words. They sing silence. They reach for the child. But Sobuk rises. Not today, he growls. With his claws, he carves rivers into the desert. Floods rush out from his chest. Not of water, but of remembered dreams. Every wave carries a story. A mother naming her child. A scribe finishing his poem. A farmer planting a fig tree under Ra's light. And the firstborn are washed away, screaming as they are returned to non-memory. Sobuk stands bleeding. He does not fall. Kasef's choice. All now fall silent. The scrolls are ashes. The stars are gone. Time holds its breath. Kasef walks to the edge of the great crack in the world, the gap Mecca opened. He stares into the alternate world where he was never born. A world at peace. Behind him, the others wait. And then the child weeps. I was made to erase. That was my purpose. The king answers gently.
No.
That was your function, not your fate. Kasef turns. And for the first time, he smiles. Then he steps into the doorway, not to rule, but to disappear. The crack closes, and the sky sighs. Epilogue. The new scribe. In the ruined temple of Thoth, where no god lives, a new scribe begins to write. She is neither priestess nor queen, just a girl. She dips her finger into ink, and on the first page of the new scroll, she writes, Let us remember, not to worship, but to become. The stars return, the Nile clears, and somewhere beneath the desert, a single seed, the last word never spoken, begins to bloom. Part 18. The Garden of Forgotten Gods. After the silence. It had been 700 years since Kasef stepped into the world that did not need him. The sand settled, the stars returned, and the Nile flowed with quiet grief, not in mourning, but in memory. Most believed the gods were gone. Some whispered they were merely asleep. But far beyond the Valley of Kings, beyond the reach of maps and myths, something old still bloomed. A garden, tended by no hands, watered by no river, and yet evergreen. It was called the Garden of Forgotten Gods. No one found it. It found them. The pilgrim with no shadow. The garden's first visitor in an age was a man who cast no shadow. He did not speak his name, not because he had forgotten it, but because he had given it away. Long ago, he had been a priest of Ma'at, goddess of balance. He had traded his name to save a city from judgment. The city was long gone, but he remained. He entered the garden and found statues overgrown with vines. A falcon-headed god, crumbling under the weight of silence. A lioness, her claws dulled, her eyes dim. A scarab made of black obsidian, broken in half. A serpent of light, buried under ivy. He bowed to each. He remembered, and in that remembering, the statue stirred. The voice in the roots. Deep beneath the garden, where the oldest roots writhed through fossil and bone, there was a heartbeat. It did not beat like a man's. It pulsed like truth trying to escape a lie. And within it slept the voice of Nut, the Sky Mother, long hidden since her children fell silent. She whispered in her sleep, "Who will lift the sky again? Who will remember my name when the stars fall once more?" The roots shuddered, for above, something had awakened. Not God,
Not man.
but a third thing, born of both, loyal to neither. It walked on two legs but cast three shadows. And its hunger was not for power, but for rewriting. The return of Nefret's fire. In the southern city of Wazit, once called Thebes, where ruins slept beneath desert wind, a flame rekindled. From a scroll buried in the tomb of Nefret, a spark ignited, not of fire, but of will. A girl named Asira, born to a line of forgotten scribes, had found the tomb. Her fingers traced Nefret's burned words, her blood mixing with ancient ink. And Nefret's voice whispered to her, "I burned so that you may bloom." Asira rose, and behind her, a wall of the tomb peeled open, not into stone, but into script, an entire passageway made of words. She stepped inside. The scroll had become a path, and she was walking into the unwritten. Sobek's oath. Far from men, deep in the wet and choked delta, where few dared tread, Sobek still lived. Weakened, yes, but not dead. The god of crocodiles had taken to silence since the battle of the place without maps. His teeth were dull, his temple a ruin, his priests all dust. But in the reflection of every Nile ripple, he saw them returning. The devourers, the creatures that had once served Kasef, now broken.
Wild. Lost.
But dangerous. One had taken root in a child's dream in Memphis. Another crawled out of a woman's painting in Heliopolis. They were spreading, feeding on what was nearly forgotten. And Sobek, old and wounded, rose from the swamp and swore, "Let the gods forget me. Let my name be washed from stone. But these things shall not pass." He opened his jaws and summoned the old river once more. The oracle in chains. High atop the red mountain, where no bird flew, a single figure knelt in chains of gold and silence. Her name was Ayutet, the last true oracle of Egypt. She had once spoken with the gods through the wind, the moonlight, the curl of incense. Now, her tongue had been taken by the third shadow, the being that sought to rewrite not history, but possibility. She could no longer speak truths, but still her eyes wept stories. And in those tears, falling like pearls onto stone, visions bloomed. A child born with a voice that turned lies to dust. A statue that wept blood and walked at dawn. A scroll buried in sand, with one line that would awaken the dead sky. The chains rattled, and somewhere in the dark, something watched her cry. To be continued. The gods are no longer gods. The names are fading again. But now, a new chapter begins, one where power is no longer born from blood, but from memory, story, and choice. Will Asira survive the script path? Will the third shadow consume what remains? Will Sobek hold back the tide? And will the oracle break her silence before the sky cracks once more? The desert listens. And the story continues. Part 19. The Scroll That Dreamed. Asira in the Script Path. The passage Asira entered was not carved from stone or wood, but letters, winding and shifting like serpents. Each step she took rewrote the walls around her. The path was alive, feeding off her thoughts. When she feared, it darkened. When she doubted, it narrowed. But when she remembered Nefert's fire, the way lit itself with golden glyphs. She saw words etched in blood and breath. The first gods were not born. They were spoken. The passage pulsed. A door of papyrus bloomed ahead. Behind it, a chamber that whispered dreams. Inside floated a scroll older than Are, untouched by hand or flame. Its name? The Scroll That Dreamed. Asira stepped forward. The scroll opened without touch, and the words inside began to read her. What the scroll saw. It saw Asira's heartbeat, the rhythm of an unborn story. It saw the moment her mother died, whispering her daughter's name into the wind. It saw her father's ink-stained hands burying broken tablets in the dunes. It saw the flame of Nefert reborn in her blood. But then the scroll wept ink. It had seen something else. A sky split in two. A rewritten sun. A throne carved from broken names. A godless world ruled by silence. It saw the third shadow seated upon that throne, rewriting Egypt into emptiness. The scroll's last line curled around Asira's wrist like a serpent. You must write what was never allowed to exist. The scroll vanished, and in Asira's hand appeared a reed pen, formed of obsidian, wrapped in hair, inked with potential. She was no longer a girl. She was now a scribe of what should not be. Meanwhile, in the garden, the man with no shadow watched as the garden trembled. The statues had begun to cry. Horus bled from his eyes. Sekhmet growled in her sleep. The scarab cracked, revealing a smaller scarab inside, made of starlight. Thoth's broken ibis beak twitched. From the soil rose a shape, not plant, not stone, but memory given form. It whispered, the script path has opened. The dream scroll has chosen. And the devourers return, unbound. The man knelt. He pressed his head to the roots and whispered his name once more. It returned to him like lightning in his blood. I am Menes, first scribe of the first dynasty. I return to write again. The garden bloomed in silence. The three that devour. Across the kingdoms, the devourers moved like plagues. Not beasts, not demons, but unwritten ideas. Their names were forgotten, and that made them powerful. Each took a different form. One, the red silence, a mist that swallowed temples, erasing history itself. Two, the whispering clay, statues that spoke lies sweetly, turning cities against their past. Three, the empty tongue, a creature without a face, that sucked words from people's throats, leaving them hollow. Wherever they moved, stories died. And with each story lost, the third shadow grew stronger. In Memphis, children forgot lullabies. In Heliopolis, priests forgot prayers mid-chant. In Abydos, even the bones of pharaohs no longer knew their names. Sobek's hunt. In the northern delta, Sobek carved paths through forgotten waterways. He no longer roared. He whispered, because the devourers fed on noise. His crocodile eyes glowed with old fury. He tracked the red silence through ruined villages. He faced the whispering clay in the tomb city of Sais. And now, he hunted the most dangerous, the empty tongue. It had stolen the voice of 1,000 souls. But Sobek did not speak. He remembered. He remembered the stories of fishermen, of old women who sang to the river, of songs children shouted at dusk. He remembered their sounds. And in his memory, he found a weapon. He opened his throat and bellowed their voices back into the world. 1,000 voices screamed through him, and the empty tongue cracked like glass under moonlight. It bled ink and vanished. Sobek collapsed. But he smiled. The third shadow moves. In the ruins of Akhetaten, where Akhenaten once banished gods and worshipped the sun alone, the third shadow stirred. It took shape only when unseen. It could not be touched. It could not be spoken of. But it could be feared. And that fear shaped it. It now had a body of ash, a crown of smoke, and a heart made of erased papyrus. Its goal was not to rule Egypt. It was to erase the idea of Egypt itself. The names, the stories, the gods, the Nile, the pyramids, the very word Egypt. And only one thing stood in its way now. A girl with ink in her blood, a pen in her hand, and a scroll that dreamed of what could never be. To be continued. The war is no longer of swords or gods. It is a battle of memory, story, and forgetting. Asira walks the path between pages. Sobuk bleeds but hunts still. The garden watches. And the third shadow writes erasure with every breath. Will Asira find the lost word that binds creation? Will the old gods awaken, or be forgotten forever? Will Egypt survive the unwriting? The sand stirs. The stars wait. And the ink is not yet dry. Part 20. The Song Beneath the Stone. The desert that dreamed of rain. Far west, beyond the necropolises and forgotten battlefields, stretched the sea of sand, where dunes whispered ancient names to the wind. Few traveled here. For this was the land where time did not pass. It spiraled. And at the center of this spiral, buried beneath 7 layers of sun-blasted stone, lay the obsidian chamber. A prison. A tomb. A heartbeat. Once, the gods had locked something here, a being not of this world, not of story, not even of shadow. A note of discord, a single cursed sound that could shatter meaning itself. Its name was never written. Its name was never spoken. But it was remembered by stone. And now, something far from the chamber stirred it. It began to hum. Just once. The sand shivered. Asira and the library without doors. The scroll path led Asira to a cliffside. There, carved into nothing, hung a doorless wall of text that rippled in the sun like smoke-bound parchment. Behind it was the library without doors, a place that existed before language. She stepped through, not with feet but with understanding. Inside, shelves drifted like clouds. Librarians had no eyes, only ears. Books were not opened, they were listened to. A voice greeted her. Daughter of Nefert's fire. You carry the pen of becoming. You have entered a place where every story wants to be told. Be warned. Some should never be. Asira held up the obsidian pen. It whispered against her skin. Write only what must be. She asked the librarians about the third shadow. They trembled. One offered her a page bound in bone, a fragment of the first silence, the language used to erase gods. She took it, wrapped it in linen, and moved deeper still. Menes and the Echo Temple. Back in the Garden of Forgotten Gods, Menes, the first scribe, stood beneath the statue of Thoth, god of wisdom. The god stirred. Not fully awake, but enough to speak. You seek to stop the unwriting, old friend. Menes bowed. I seek to rewrite hope. Thoth's voice cracked like dry papyrus. Then you must enter the Echo Temple. It is where all the words ever swallowed, silenced, or stolen still echo. Menes opened his scroll. The ink bled upward, forming steps. He descended into darkness. The Echo Temple screamed. The priest with a broken name. In the city of Tanis, where the temples were cracked and priests walked in hollow processions, one among them stirred from the dust of forgetting. He was known only as a Seth, which was not his name, merely the sound he was left with after the empty tongue had passed through. But a Seth remembered dreams. In those dreams, he walked beside a river of silver. In those dreams, a woman with stars in her eyes touched his chest and whispered, "Even forgotten names hold power." He awoke with a tremor in his spine and fire in his breath. And upon the wall, drawn by his own bloodied fingers, appeared a glyph. Return. The third shadow's rewrite. In the ruins of Akedaton, the third shadow walked among priests frozen mid-prayer, scribes turned to ash mid-word. It pressed its fingers, made of ink and absence, upon a stone tablet. Words unraveled. Histories collapsed. It laughed without sound. It had begun the rewrite, but something resisted. A single, stubborn glyph burned into the surface. It pulsed. The shadow recoiled. It was a name, not of a god, not of a king, but of a scribe. It read, Asira. And for the first time since its birth, the third shadow paused. The blood moon rises. Over the pyramids of Giza, a strange light grew. The moon, always a watcher, now bled. A crimson eye, glaring at the world. It had not turned red since the time of the Great Reversal, when Sekhmet had nearly drunk all of humanity's blood in her fury. The red moon was not an omen. It was a summons. All across Egypt, ghosts stirred in tombs. Mummies whispered forgotten oaths. Statues wept ink. Children began to draw glyphs they'd never been taught. The sky was remembering. So too must the earth. To be continued. A storm gathers. Asira walks the path between lost libraries and forbidden stories. Menes listens to the cries of silenced words. The priest Seth remembers a name he never had. And the third shadow, for the first time, feels something ancient and unfamiliar.
Doubt.
The scroll is not yet finished. The ink still flows. And the next word could save or destroy everything that has ever been. Part 21. The ink that remembers. The chamber of breathless names. Beneath the sands of Saqqara, where priests once buried the dead with names sewn into linen wrappings, lay a sealed vault untouched by time. Inside, the chamber of breathless names. A place where names of the condemned, the cursed, and the forgotten were hidden, so they would never return. But the seal had begun to crack, and from the gap, a thin black mist escaped, thick with voices that had no throats. One name was louder than the rest. It pulsed against the air like a second heartbeat. Karen. A name struck from stone, banished from scrolls. Even the gods had erased it. But now, Karen remembered himself. He would rise again, and not as man, god, or beast, but as story unbound. Asira and the ink trial. The library without doors had a center, though none had ever reached it. Asira now stood before a stone basin, filled not with water, but pure ink, blacker than obsidian, alive with movement. A voice spoke from the ceiling. Only those who let go of their past may take up the ink that remembers. What are you willing to forget, child of fire? Asira's eyes trembled. Her mother's face. The scent of cinnamon on her father's robes. The moment she'd first heard her name sung in a cradle song. She bit her lip. Blood fell into the ink. The basin hissed. The ink rose like a serpent and wrapped around her wrist, becoming a second skin. A living tattoo. With it, she could write what no ink dared to hold. Names lost. Truths denied. Deaths unwritten. But every truth she wrote would cost her memory. And Asira had so few left. The Echo Temple's wail. In the Echo Temple, Menes knelt at the center of a spiral staircase carved from sound. He heard the last breath of kings, the weeping of exiled scribes, the laughter of murdered gods, and then silence. Not absence, but a presence made a void. It spoke in broken echoes. You wrote me once and then erased me, but I lingered between your letters. I am the flaw in every scroll. I am the mistake that births monsters. Menes trembled. He knew the voice. It was his own, twisted. The ink he once spilled had become something else, something hungry. The echo of himself, now shaped into a shadow being. Aikinu, the false scribe. And he was no longer bound to parchment. He walked the crimson path. As the blood moon continued to rise, a path of red light stretched across the Nile, reaching into every village, temple, and tomb. Those who stepped upon it heard voices, not their own. Memories returned unbidden. A blind potter remembered being a soldier. A girl born mute sang the song of Osiris. A jackal howled and spoke the name Anubis. The crimson path was not of this world. It was the Nile of memory, flowing backward. And at its mouth stood the resurrected priest, Seth. His voice, once stolen, now thundered with hundreds of names. He raised a staff made of bone and copper, and declared, "Let the forgotten rise. Let the unnamed speak. Let Egypt remember itself." The people followed him. A march of memory had begun. The third shadow stirs the storm. Far across the sands, Atop a black pyramid that no map dared mark, the third shadow stood beneath the bleeding sky. Its face was still shifting, made of lost faces and forgotten screams. It reached down and tore a scroll from the ground, a scroll that bled as if alive. With hands of silence, it wrote, "The Nile no longer flows. The gods are dust. The scribes are ash. There is only the end." But as it pressed the final glyph, the scroll resisted. The ink peeled away. For the first time, the shadow felt something alien. Defiance. And it whispered one name it feared most. Asira. The gathering at Karnak. The ancient temple of Karnak, long buried in sand and silence, now glowed with unseen fire. Ghosts gathered. Old gods flickered. Sobek limped through its gates, his breath shallow but his eyes burning. Behind him came Aseth. From the north came Menes, carrying a scroll that hissed with living truth. And from the shadows, Asira stepped forward. Her inked wrist shimmered. The gods, statues, and spirit both turned to her. She raised the obsidian pen and etched one word into the air. It did not translate. It did not need to. The ground shook. The heavens cracked. And Egypt itself seemed to awaken. Part 22. When Gods Begin to Dream. The trembling of Thoth's quill. Beneath the shattered temple vaults of Hermopolis, where the ibis-headed god Thoth once recorded the balance of all things, something stirred. The sacred quill of measure, long buried beneath layers of dust and disbelief, had begun to tremble. It shook not from the wind, but from the weight of too many truths returning at once. Scrolls unfurled by themselves. Clay tablets cracked open to reveal second inscriptions, hidden beneath the visible. And across the desert, every scribe, living, dead, and half-forgotten, felt a pressure behind their eyes. Write or be erased. Thoth himself, now only half-statue and half-spirit, blinked for the first time in 1,000 years. He spoke one name. Asira, the quill chooses again. Asira, and the dream of a living glyph. She stood now in the ruins of the Hall of Two Truths, where souls had once been weighed by Ma'at. But the scales were broken, and in their place, carved into the black stone floor, was a glyph that pulsed like a heartbeat. Not written by chisel,
Not inked by hand,
but grown like a living creature born of language. Asira knelt. Her inked arm glowed. The tattoo pulsed in reply. She reached out, and when her fingers touched the glyph, she was no longer in her body. She was floating through a sea of unread stories, worlds that might have been. In one, Egypt had never fallen. In another, she had been pharaoh. In yet another, she was never born, but her name still echoed in the walls. The glyph whispered, "You are not a scribe, Asira. You are a root, and stories grow from you." She gasped and awoke. The living glyph had fused into her skin. She now bore the symbol of origin, a mark no god or mortal had worn since the world began. Menes and the Scroll of the Sky. Far above Thebes, Menes climbed the staircase of smoke, a forgotten trail etched only in myth. At its end stood the Scroll of the Sky, a tablet carved from a fallen star, capable of rewriting the stars themselves. But guarding it was the veiled archivist, a figure draped in layers of forgotten languages, its face hidden behind a papyrus mask. The archivist spoke in 7 voices at once. "Why seek the sky's scroll, scribe of regret?"
Menes held his staff firm.
"Because the sky was once truth. Now it is a lie written in fire. I will set it right." The archivist bled ink and opened the path. Menes stepped forward and placed his palm on the star-metal scroll. Visions tore through him. The day the pyramids were born from thunder. The first time Ra wept. The moment the third shadow was unbound. And then a future yet to be. One where Egypt stood tall once more, but only if one sacrifice was made. Menes clutched his chest. He had seen who must be sacrificed. A Seth, herald of the remembered. In the oasis of Bahariya, where tombs bloomed like lotus flowers in sand, a Seth stood before a growing crowd. Thousands, maybe more. Mummies unwrapped their bandages and wept. Children chanted names they never knew were theirs. Even animals bowed. Aseth raised his hands. You have been forgotten. You have been made myths, dust, relics. But now, you are the army of remembrance. March not with blades, but with stories. Tell your names. Speak your truths. Tear down the silence with memory. And the ground answered. From beneath the earth, ancient voices rose. The sand turned to stone. And from that stone, pyramids began to rebuild themselves, not as tombs but as beacons. The third shadow fractures. Inside the hollow pyramid, the third shadow split. Not by force, but by doubt. From its body emerged another form, smaller, trembling, made of ink and ash. It had eyes. It remembered pain. And it spoke. What if we were once human? What if we were the story, not the erasure? The larger shadow roared, a scream that cracked the sky. But the smaller one ran. It carried something, a fragment of a scroll, written by a Syra long ago. Even the darkness has a story. And even stories deserve a name. The third shadow was no longer whole, and that made it vulnerable. The stars began to rewrite. In the night sky above all Egypt, a new constellation formed. It showed a pen piercing a serpent, a woman standing over fire, a god bowing to a mortal, a scroll burning then blooming. People looked up in wonder. The elders whispered, "The stars are no longer remembering. They are learning." Part 23. The Sand That Sang of Fire. The cracking of the moonstone throne. Far south in the Temple of Nub, forgotten by men but not by time, a throne carved of moonstone began to crack. It had sat untouched since the pharaoh of flame fell, a ruler whose heart had burned so bright it scorched even the gods. Now the crack spread, and from it poured silver dust that hummed with song. The dust did not fall, it drifted upward, as though seeking the stars. And the throne began to whisper, "He returns. The one whose fire made kings kneel. He returns." The priests, long dead in their sarcophagi, opened glowing eyes and sang, "Rise, Karef, Pharaoh of fire, awaken from ash." Assyra and the library that bled. Assyra stood now before a tower that was not built, but grown. The living library, a forest of scrolls instead of trees, leaves made of vellum, bark of hardened ink. It bled where it was wounded. She stepped carefully, for the roots whispered, "Every step writes something. Choose your path, for it cannot be erased." At the heart of the library hung a book bound in bronze and bone. It hovered, chained to nothing, guarded by nothing, for it needed no guard. It was the first book, the one that recorded the creation of language itself. But as Assyra reached for it, her inked wrist glowed bright red. The book pulsed and spoke. "You carry a pen that dares to rewrite me. Will you bleed for every word you alter?" She nodded once. Her fingers touched the spine. And all around her, the library screamed. Menes and the truth beneath Thebes. Deep beneath the buried city of Thebes, Menes crawled through a tunnel of mirrors, each one showing not reflection, but regret. In one mirror, he saw himself failing to save a child. In another, burning a scroll he once swore to protect. In the last, he saw Assyra dead by his hand. He hesitated, but he kept walking. At the end of the tunnel, he found a second self. It looked like him. It was him, but without fear, without kindness, without mercy. "This is the version of you that chose power over truth," the walls whispered. "Will you face him, or become him?" Menes drew his blade of etched obsidian, a blade that cut lies. The duel began. One would walk forward. The other would be buried in silence. Aseth's voice and the choir of bones. In the Valley of Echoes, Aseth stood atop a dune made of broken teeth and shattered masks. Before him stood 10,000 warriors, once nameless, now singing their identities into the wind. He raised his hands. "You are not dead. You are not forgotten. You are unfinished sentences, and I will be your ending." He struck the earth with his staff. From below rose a choir of bones, skeletons stitched together by hieroglyphs, armor inked onto ribs, blades made of old papyrus turned sharp. They did not march. They sang as they advanced. Their battle cry was a poem, and their shield was memory. The rebirth of Karef. In the temple where the moonstone throne cracked, fire poured from every column. A figure emerged from the smoke, tall, lean, eyes like burning emeralds. He wore no crown, yet all fell to their knees. Karef, pharaoh of flame, returned not as flesh, but as ember and wrath. His voice rumbled like a volcano mourning. "Who unsealed me?" The priests whispered, "Asira." Karef turned toward the wind, and the wind fled from him. "Then I will find her, and either she will kneel, or the world will burn again." The shadow's fractured mind. The third shadow, once mighty, now trembled. Its split self, the shard called Talit, wandered through the deserts, unsure if it was a ghost or a beginning. It carried fragments of Asira's scrolls in its chest. Wherever it walked, flowers grew in ink, a blend of dark and light. The people saw Talit and began to speak again. Stories once silenced returned to tongues. Children played old games that no one had taught them. Talit smiled. Even shadows can bloom. But far above, the rest of the third shadow looked down, and for the first time it envied. The celestial alignment begins. In the night sky, stars turned. The constellation of the scribe bled into the serpent. The scales of Ma'at tilted. The eye of Ra blinked for the first time in centuries. The gods murmured. The veil between realms thinned. And at its thinnest point, just outside Luxor, the gate of the unwritten shimmered into view. A gateway to what had not yet been, guarded by no one, because none had ever reached it. Asira stood before it now, pen in hand, tattoo glowing. Behind her came Seth, Menes, Talit, and far in the distance, a figure of fire with emerald eyes. Part 24. The Gate of the Unwritten. Asira at the threshold. The gate of the unwritten shimmered like water touched by stars, a great arch of black stone veined with gold, its surface swirling with stories yet to happen. Asira stood before it, her breath shallow. Behind her, the inked sigils on her arm pulsed like a heartbeat. She could feel it, all of time pressing inward, begging her to choose. A voice echoed from within the gate. "You may write what is to come, but in doing so, you must give up what was." She turned behind her. Menes approached, blood on his blade, but fire in his eyes. He had survived the duel with his darker self. "You mustn't walk alone," he said. Then came Seth, his bone-armored army trailing behind like a funeral song turned triumph. "We are the voices they tried to silence," Seth said. "Let them hear us." And lastly, from the dunes beyond, came Talit, the fractured piece of the third shadow. It bowed low. Not all shadows wish to devour. Some only want to be understood. Asira took one breath, then stepped forward, and the gate opened. Inside the gate, time here did not pass, it waited. The realm beyond the gate was a skyless desert lit by the glow of unfinished dreams. Scrolls floated in the air like jellyfish. Some were blank. Others showed moments that never happened but might. Asira and the others moved carefully through it. The further they went, the harder it became to remember the past, their names, their pain, even their purpose. Menes stumbled. "What were we trying to save?" Asira held his hand. "The right to choose our story, to write it ourselves." They reached the heart of the realm, a massive obelisk made of shifting ink and stars. It was the seed of all story. No one had touched it in millennia. Not gods. Not kings. Only a true scribe, one willing to give everything, could awaken it. Karef's firestorm. But even beyond time, wrath burns. Karef, the resurrected pharaoh of flame, had found the gate. He did not pass through like a mortal. He shattered it. With a scream that cracked constellations, he tore through the realm of the unwritten like wildfire through parchment. "I gave up my soul to create order," he roared. "And now you would replace it with chaos?" The scrolls ignited as he passed, turning possible futures to ash. He reached the seed and faced Asira. Surrender the ink, return the flame, or burn beside the cowards you follow. Asira stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but the ink in her veins blazed like black fire. You built a kingdom of fear, Karef. I will build one of memory. And she placed her hand on the seed. The rewriting begins. The seed bloomed, not into light, but into story. It spilled images in every direction, children learning forgotten songs, gods weeping in wonder, shadows dancing without shame. The realm of the unwritten became a river, and Asira became its current. She saw every path. A world where Egypt became eternal. A world where none of them ever existed. A world where even Karef could be forgiven. And she made her choice. She wrote not a future. She wrote a question. What if the story belonged to everyone? Karef's fall. Karef screamed, a scream of rage, of memory, of centuries of silence breaking all at once. He struck her, but his flame passed through her, for she was now ink, and ink does not burn. He fell to his knees as the fire left him. Talit approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. Even you are a story, not a tyrant, not a god, just a story waiting to be told right. Karef wept, for the first time in 3,000 years. Returned to the waking sands. The group awoke in the real world. The gate of the unwritten was gone. In its place stood a single stone, engraved with a single line. We are not what they wrote. We are what we remember. The world had changed. The Nile flowed backward for one night. The pyramids hummed. Children began to speak in ancient tongues. And across every wall, in every city, the same symbol appeared, the mark of the pen and the flame. A new age had begun, not ruled by kings, not feared by gods, but shaped by story. Part 25. The Tomb of Echoing Light. A new dawn in Wazit. The city of Wazit, called Thebes in foreign tongues, awoke beneath a sky unlike any it had known. The stars had shifted. The priests muttered of omens, but the children only laughed, pointing to symbols glowing faintly on temple walls. Aseth stood on the balcony of the Temple of Ma'at, watching the city stir. Behind him, the choir of bones waited, silent now. Their duty, for a time, was fulfilled. We fought to give them a voice, Aseth whispered. Now we must help them remember how to use it. Below, the common folk wrote poems in the dust with their fingers. They sang again in forgotten cadences. Elders whispered names long thought cursed. Truths hidden for generations began to stir. And Aseth knew. This was only the beginning. The Council of the Rewritten. Deep in the ruined library of Jadet, once destroyed by fire, now reborn from Asira's ink, the four walked among shelves that had never been built, but had always existed in potential. Asira, now wearing robes etched with glyphs of becoming, stood at a round table of stone and starlight. With her sat Menes, who had faced himself and chosen wisdom over vengeance. Aseth, whose voice could wake bones and bind nations. Talit, the shadow that chose empathy. And beside them sat Karef, not as a king, not as a god, but as a man wrapped in linen, eyes lowered, voice quiet. Why let him stay? Menes asked. Because he is a wound that chose to scar, Asira replied. We are all stories in revision. They placed before them the scroll of the new covenant, a pact not written in law or blood, but possibility. And they began to write. The return of the scribes. Across Egypt, the scribes of the unwritten rose again. They were not priests, not rulers, but recorders, questioners, guardians of forgotten truths. They came wearing robes marked with shifting ink, carrying styluses that could pierce illusion. One scribe uncovered a map in Saqqara showing tunnels beneath the pyramids, whispering of a city of mirrors. Another in Memphis found a child who could speak in verses older than the Nile, her laughter healing wounds. In Elephantine, a blind man began to paint scenes from dreams no one had dared dream. Asira smiled as word reached her. "They are writing again," she said. "The story lives. The shattered shadow awakens." But even as the light grew stronger, the pieces left behind did not sleep. In the depths of the black oasis, far west of the known sands, the shards of the third shadow stirred. Talit had taken its heart, but the mind remained, twisted by centuries of silence. It took a new name, Netep, the Forgotten Mind. Netep did not wish to destroy the world. It wished to erase it, to return everything to the silence before the first word. And it had begun collecting unsaid thoughts, gathering the pain of the silenced, the erased, the buried. A storm of unspoken sorrow formed around it, thick as ink and cold as absence. "Let them sing," Netep whispered. "When the silence returns, their songs will be meaningless." The Oracle of Threads. On the edge of the desert, in a temple without walls, sat the Oracle of Threads, a being woven from time and flesh, face always turning. Asira came to her alone. "I seek the path that keeps all stories safe." The Oracle laughed, a sound like bells and thunder. "You seek to protect stories? Then understand. Stories are not safe. They are dangerous.
They burn. They change.
You cannot hold them. You can only let them breathe." Asira bowed. "Then I will not be their cage. I will be their wind." The Oracle smiled and gave her a gift, a needle carved from moonlight, meant not to stitch flesh, but to bind memory to future. The first forgotten city. In the deep desert, where sand turned to glass, the city of Naroheket was found. A place erased from every record, its walls shaped from petrified sound, its streets paved with hieroglyphs that rearranged as one walked. No one remembered building it, but it remembered them. Asira and her companions entered it, the glyphs lighting with recognition. And there, at its heart, they found the well of first breath, a pool of still ink said to be the source of all storytelling. When Asira dipped her hand into it, she saw a future where words healed kingdoms, a past where a scribe had silenced a god with one line, a truth that the gods themselves feared, that mortals, not gods, were the true authors of the world.